Coming up, compensation and career trends in the food sciences, debunking regional coffee myths, and exploring the convergence of food and technology. This is episode 39 of Omnivore, from the editors of Food Technology Magazine and the Institute of Food Technologists.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by Almond Board of California. Almonds offer endless possibilities for innovation. Visit almonds.com/trends to learn more.
Welcome to Omnivore from IFT and Food Technology, where we explore the intersection of business, science, and technology in the global food system. I'm Bill McDowell. Finding the right career fit is never easy. Just ask anyone who's ever looked for a job. And shifting expectations post-COVID haven't made things simpler. To get some perspective on what's happening right now in the scientific employment scene, Food Technology's Mary Ellen Kuhn turned to food industry executive recruiter Moira McGrath, president of search firm Opus International.
You've got 25 years of experience as an executive recruiter for the food industry. So I thought it would be interesting if you just started today by telling our listeners what a recruiter actually does.
Well, when our client has an opening, they run ads, they do their own networking, and if they're not successful in filling the role, that's when they reach out to us. So we don't run ads, we recruit. We speak to the hiring manager to get a clear understanding of what they need, and then we use our expertise in finding candidates who have these qualifications. We have our own network. We have been in the food science recruiting industry for many years, and we use LinkedIn. And we're searching for people who are not necessarily looking for a job, but looking for someone who has the specific qualifications that the employer is looking for. So we reach out to them who qualify, and we sell the opportunity to the candidate. And I'd say 90% of those we place are candidates who are not on the job market, but that those who we have contacted directly.
Well, that's really interesting. I didn't realize it was such a high percentage. So you have to really be pretty persuasive, I guess.
Yes, your LinkedIn note has to be a real selling point of why someone should make a change, why someone should look at this opportunity. There's a lot of reasons why. Upward mobility. I never sell money. Just sell the opportunity for next step careers is really what I'm looking for. So if someone is looking for someone who's a senior food scientist, I might reach out to food scientists who are looking for that next step into senior level roles, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. Well, I'm lucky enough to get to talk to you usually every year or so about the time we do our career and compensation research. So what should we know about the job market for science of food positions right now?
Well, the market is strong, and I don't see any issues changing this in the future. The bottom line is that there are not enough degreed food scientists coming out of universities. That creates a shortage, which creates a great job market for those who are looking for something new. As we know, everyone has to eat, and the food scientists are the people who create the products and keep it safe. There will always be a need for food scientists.
So built-in job security, I guess.
Absolutely.
From everything I've read, a lot of things have changed in terms of people's expectations about their jobs, specifically since the COVID-19 pandemic period. And employers have had to adjust too. So where do things stand right now? What are some reasonable expectations for a job candidate in terms of flexible schedules, working remotely, working from home, that kind of thing?
Yes, well, when COVID hit, many people were working from home for a couple of years. But now that everything is opening up, the food industry is slowly bringing employees back to the plant or to the lab. Frankly, our industry requires cross-functional communications, meetings, trips to plants and labs, and that requires people to be on site. Collaboration is very important in our field. So what we're seeing is that scientists are being required to work on site, but with an opportunity to work from home a day or two a week. This seems to be a good balance for everyone.
And that's something that people are comfortable with, like on both sides?
It depends. It depends. It actually depends on which state you're talking to. In California, they want to work from home all the time. Other places in the country, they're more anxious to be with people. But it totally depends on who you're talking to. Some people don't want to do anything but remote. Well, they limit their opportunities when they do that.
Well said. One of the things you mentioned when I interviewed you for the food tech article is that people are changing jobs so much more frequently than they have in the past, and employers don't like it. So talk to us about that. How much change is too much?
Yes, we're seeing this too often, where, say, a 2021 graduate in 2024 has already had 3 jobs. And this is far too much. Think about what the employer is thinking about. They see someone who's changed jobs 3 times in 3 years. Well, they think, A, that person has not thought through their decision through employment. That doesn't ring well. Or B, they have no loyalty to the employer. Or C, maybe they're not performing and they think that maybe they should quit the job before they are asked to leave. And none of these scenarios speak well of the candidate. When seeking a new position, everyone should make sure that that job is in the right city and state, that the team that you'll be working with are people that you could enjoy working with, and that the job is the right challenge for you, and that there's opportunity for you in the future. My clients tell me not to present candidates who are job hoppers. They just don't want to hire someone who won't stay more than a year or 2. Frankly, it's expensive. They're training someone for a year or 2, and then that person takes off and goes to a competitor. They're not interested in hiring someone who's going to leave in a short period of time.
Well, that's really food for thought, I think. And it kind of relates to something else that we talked about that I thought was so interesting. You have so many great thoughts on the whole idea of culture fit. So what do you mean when you say that companies have specific cultures and job seekers should make sure they understand exactly what that culture is before they even think about going to work for that company?
Yes, culture of the company is very important when considering a new opportunity. Frankly, when candidates call us and say that they're not happy with the job they're in, most of the time it's because it's not a good culture fit. And every company has a culture. Some are aggressive, some are more technical, scientific, some have high values, some have low values. I always recommend to candidates that they do their homework, speak to people who work there or used to work there, find out what the reputation of the company is that you're interviewing with. As an example, what's the expected work ethic or time? Are you going to be working 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week? Is it 100% travel? Is it 50% travel? All these things are important, and it's part of the culture. And the culture, in my mind, is really a family. These are people you'll be working with 40 to 50 hours a week. Make sure the family is a good fit for you.
Well, that's a good analogy. But isn't it a little bit tricky? Could you share any tips on how to go about it? You mentioned some, but any other ones? For example, I was intrigued by the fact that you brought up the number of hours that you work. Like, aren't candidates sometimes nervous about asking that kind of question? Or are they afraid that it's going to give the wrong impression? Or is it just good to be upfront?
Yeah, you have to know what you're getting yourself into, especially after an offer has been extended. But you want to talk to people. Talk to the people. Who are you going to be working for? What kind of manager is this person? That's another question you need to ask yourself. Who's on the team? Are there troublemakers on the team and you're going to have trouble with those people? Google even has comments from employees online where you can read about what people say about working at that particular company. But you just have to, again, do your homework. It's absolutely necessary because you don't want to get there and say, oh my God, I made a huge mistake. You want to be very comfortable And by being comfortable, I mean, you know enough about what you're getting yourself into so that you're going to be happy there.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and it's certainly good advice. I imagine it's something that everybody doesn't think about enough.
As a recruiter, that's something I'm always talking to candidates about. Make sure this is the right thing to do. Talk to your family. Is it the city? If yours is a relocation, talk to the family about changing opportunities, changing cities and states, changing schools. These are things that everybody has to be involved in. But as far as the job is concerned, remember that it is joining a family. And it's something that you have to ask yourself, are you going to be happy there? Does this job offer you what you want? You're going to perform better if you're happy. And if you perform better, you're going to be doing a good job. And then you're going to be in line for a promotion. And they like you and you like them. That's what you're looking for. It's like a good marriage. So look at the big picture, not just the money and the title, but the nuts and bolts of what this job can offer you overall. And when you see the whole picture fits, that's when you go for it.
Moira McGrath is president of food science recruitment firm Opus International. Learn more about what she and other experts had to say about IFT's latest compensation and career path research in the July issue of Food Technology. We'll be back with more Omnivore in a moment, but first, this word from our sponsor.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by Almond Board of California. Almonds offer endless possibilities for innovation. To help you stay ahead of the curve, Almond Board partnered with TasteWise, a generative AI platform for modern food and beverage brands, to identify shifts that will help shape the future of snacking and beyond. Get inspired and learn more by visiting almonds.com/trends. Again, that's visiting almonds.com/trends.
Welcome back to Omnivore. I'm Bill McDowell. In coffee circles, it's long been accepted that the presence of different acids in coffee is dictated by where the beans were grown. But doctoral student Christina Birke Rune is challenging this assumption with some new lab and sensory research. Food Technology's associate editor Emily Little spoke with Birke Rune about what inspired her recent study and what it means for coffee identification.
Christina, I am so excited to talk about one of my favorite things today, coffee.
Well, me too.
So tell me a bit about this misconception between a coffee's origin and its acidity.
Well, it's believed that you can recognize a coffee's origin based on the single acids in the coffee. For instance, say that coffee from Kenya has more citric acids, and when you recognize the citric acids in the coffee, you know it's from Kenya. The problem is that this is not possible. This is all wrong. So that was the quick and dirty version of it.
So how did you decide to test this hypothesis?
Well, one of my colleagues and one of the co-authors, Ida, she took the Q-grader exam. It's like the wine sommelier version of the thing. And she went through this training with the acids, and she's like, I'm a fairly great sensory scientist, and I cannot do this. It's not possible. And then she thought, okay, maybe I'm just bad or wrong or something. But then she went home and she talked to some of her colleagues, and it was just like, okay, so nobody actually can do this. So they decided to bring me in, and then we just wanted to see, how much acidic is even in there? Is it even possible? And that was just a stone rolling down the hill from there.
That's so interesting that she immediately went to, I'm bad at this, and not that there's, not enough evidence.
Exactly.
So what kind of acids do we find in coffee usually?
We know that the 5 most pronounced acids in coffee is, if I remember correctly, is citric, malic, acetic, phosphoric, and lactic, I think. That's the most pronounced organic coffees, acids.
So for this experiment and this study, you tested 5 different coffees, both in the lab and with a sensory test. Can you tell me a bit about your results from those tests?
Yeah, so first we did an analysis of the coffee to figure out exactly the amount of acids, of the single acids we found in the coffee. So we had 5 different coffees, and we roasted them to 3 different roasting degrees, so lighter, medium, and darker, because we had a hypothesis that the roasting would have a greater impact than the origin. And we found that there was basically no difference between the acid composition in the origin, but there was a huge difference between the roasting degree. So on that basis, we could say that it makes no sense that people are focusing so much on these single acids, because it doesn't matter. It's the same in all origin. But even though we still wanted to put it to a sensory test, so we wanted to see, okay, so we spiked a coffee with the single acids in a descending degree, and we just wanted to see, so when can people actually not identify the single acid, but when can they tell that there is something more acidic added to the coffee? So we did a big scientific setup, made sure everything was correct. And what we found that it was not possible to detect just to feel when is the coffee acidic at the level actually found in the coffee. So there we could also have stopped and said, okay, it doesn't make sense to do this because it's not possible. But still, we wanted to do a test with the coffee professionals, the coffee who work with coffee every day, people who already have a Q grader exam, people who are training for Q grader exam, and so on. And we did a setup like they would do in the coffee, specialty coffee industry. And again, of course, some people, of course, can do this. But if we look at it scientifically, it's not possible for them to, because they are supposed to name the coffee, and they still couldn't do that.
That's so interesting. So to make sure I'm getting this right, does more roasting mean more acidic? Is that what you found?
Yeah, depending on the coffee, because there is some of the acidic, they are used to form other acidics. So they would, of course, decrease, and then the acidic formed during the roasting would increase. So it's acidic specific.
So how has the coffee industry and the specialty coffee industry you just talked about responded to these findings?
Yeah, with silence. We, of course, have no idea why, but mostly with silence. Some have come out and said that, but it's because the Q grader training, that was not what they were supposed to do. So this is all wrong. And then people taking the Q grade exam came back to us and say, okay, so if this is all wrong, and if this was not meant for this to happen, then why did we spend so much time on this in the exam? So we don't know what's going on. And of course, we recognize that it takes a lot of time to implement something new. And of course, somebody shouldn't just throw everything up in the air or say, okay, so one study found something, and then now we should change everything. But at least they should sit down and maybe test it again to validate our results, because of course, something might have happened in our studies, and we are the only study looking at this. So of course, nothing should be changed on that, but at least the talking should start.
What are the next steps in this research looking into the acidity in coffee?
Right now, I'm working on a project with the water used to brew the coffee, and I cannot say much yet because we are. I'm not allowed, but I can say that we are also looking into the acidity in the coffee, depending on the brew water.
Great.
And I would still love to work more with the aromas in the coffee, but that's far, far away from now.
Well, I can't wait to read about that. Christina, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you.
Christina Birke Rune is a doctoral student at the University of Southern Denmark. Her work as a food and sensory scientist is focused on product development, food ingredients, and consumer experience. You can read more about her coffee research in the July issue of Food Technology. The potential for emerging technologies like genomics, cultivated proteins, and artificial intelligence to literally redefine large swaths of the global food system is mind-boggling. But to futurist Tony Hunter, spotting the connections between tech innovation and food is all in a day's work. I recently spoke with Tony about where he sees the most likely near-term innovations occurring and why he thinks food and technology are now one and the same. Tony, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
As a futurist, you say that your job is not to predict what's going to happen, but rather to identify and embrace a range of alternative futures. Explain what you mean by that. What do you mean by alternative futures? And then if you could elaborate a little bit on what you see as some of the most plausible alternative futures for the food system over, say, the next few decades.
People often think of futurists as someone who predicts the future. We don't predict the future. We are not fortune tellers. But what we do as futurists, we look at what I term alternative futures. So what are futures that could develop? Just to clarify, there is what we call the projected future, which is basically business as usual. Everything's going to be exactly the same. Next year's this year plus X%. Then we've got probable futures, which is a continuation of current trends. Then the next one is plausible futures, and that's things that could happen based on current knowledge, but they're not as likely as what we call our probable futures. And most people work in either business as usual or a probable future. If we look at plausible futures, that's when we start saying, well, okay, what is plausible? What could happen? And what are the alternatives? And if we have a look at some of the probable futures, if you like, for the food industry, I mean, increased emphasis on sustainable production, some non-traditional ingredient sources. I think that's something that's really going to continue. We look at something like a company called California Cultured. They're growing cacao plant cells in fermenters to make chocolate ingredients. Now, you might say, oh, Tony, that's more plausible or possible, which is a Star Trek Replicators is possible, but not probable. But they've just teamed up with Meiji, the largest chocolate manufacturer in Japan, to supply them ingredients. We're a company called Enough, making mycoprotein, which is a fungal protein. They've just been funded by Cargill. So we're seeing these alternative sources of ingredients coming to the fore, and I think it's highly probable that they're going to continue. And I think also looking at we look at low resource production. I mean, one of the things that we know is there's not enough arable land or fresh water on the planet to feed everybody in the world, particularly as we go towards 2050, the way that you and I will eat in Australia and the US. So I think that we're definitely going to see low resource food ingredients coming on. And Solar Foods has already had its Solein product approved in Singapore. If we push out a little bit more into our plausible futures, I think we're looking at far more siloing of food production. We've seen the rise of globalization, right? We grow it here, ship it all around the world. And what we're seeing is countries are going, ooh, under COVID, there were problems in the supply chain. We're still seeing those problems today. So people are looking for food sovereignty. I would suggest people or countries like Singapore and Saudi Arabia are very food secure. They have enough money to buy whatever food they like, but they're not food sovereign. They're only food secure till somebody won't sell them the food. And so countries like that are going to look to be more food sovereign. And with current geopolitical tensions, I think food sovereignty is going to become a big issue for countries like China and even countries like India. Food sovereignty is going to come to the fore. And we could see a lot less export and globalization of food. And the other plausible one I hate to say to some of our listeners is the possible collapse of some of the animal agriculture sectors, particularly dairy, as some of these ingredients that they provide, like whey protein, or they feed into like infant formulas, get taken over by new technologies. And they're the high value parts. Whole milk's not high value, right? Value's in the other parts, lactoferrins, it's in infant formulas, it's in all these other things. That 3% at the bottom of the bottle, figuratively speaking, that's the proteins and fats and everything else that's in milk. And that's, I think, a quite plausible future. And I think another plausible one, maybe these days even edging into the probable, is a huge rise in gene editing of crops. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to grow crops the way that we currently do. And I think gene editing is going to become far more essential.
You just mentioned signal indicators that reference economic inputs, environmental inputs, geopolitical inputs, and technology advances. So when you're looking at the whole array and tying it back to the food system, how do you prioritize? Are there certain inputs that you prioritize higher than others when you're trying to pull this picture together?
Technology is the lens that I look through and then see how they're going to affect industry and consumers. And then within those, as you mentioned, you've got to look at the geopolitical consequences, you've got to look at the economic consequences, you've got to look at all of these inputs and see how are these technologies going to affect and be affected by these things. Because technology begets technology. Every technology is built on another technology, and that begets maybe 2 or 3 technologies or uses of that technology as we go on. And given my background in food science and technology, that's the lens through which I look to all these things as I scan the horizon, which I'm doing horizon scanning. What's at the cutting edge of what's going on? What are these signals of change saying to us about what the potential futures or the alternative futures could be?
When we were speaking before, personalization was a big focus of the conversation. And you mentioned genomics a few minutes ago. With the advances in genomics, the microbiome, how do you foresee these playing out in the process of consumer personalization evolving in food product development?
I think we've got 2 sides to personalization, Bill. One is the personalization of what I want my food to do for me. We've gone from subsistence food to tasty fuel to personalizations. I recently had my DNA analyzed by a company called Nutrigenomics. And interesting, got my results back just last week, and it tells me I need more vitamin B12 than the average person. I should concentrate on that, as well as vitamin D. It also tells me I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine. So 200 milligrams of caffeine is really what I should consume per day. So and there's many other things in the report, but that's changing my view on the foods I'm going to look to for my genetics. And I haven't had my microbiome done yet. I think that's just coming to the stage now where it's accurate enough to be actionable, because that's the thing. And so looking at that, putting those things together, I can see that's definitely from a personal point of view, and I see it in the marketplace. People looking, say, well, I want food that's good for me. That might be good for you, Bill, but it's not good for me. And so that deeper level of personalization in food is going to be something that the industry is going to have to grapple with. Do they ignore it? Do they produce more products? You can't produce a product for every one of the current 8 billion people in the world. It can't be done. But can you break it, categorize it? Can you make 5 tomato soups instead of 1?
Speaking of consumers, you seem quite bullish on the impact of the next big demographic segment to come online, Generation Alpha. What makes this generation different? What do you see as their impact on the food system? And how should companies be preparing now to meet their expectations?
I think the key thing to remember about Generation Alpha, that's those born from 2010 to the end of this year, 2024, is they're not just digital natives, they are technology natives. Technology is everywhere in their life. They've never known a life without technology in pretty well everything. The only thing they don't see much technology in is probably their food. Now, do we see a future where Gen Alphas grow up, become adults and say, I want everything to have technology being personalized for me, but not my food. I'll just take whatever you want to give me. I find that an extremely unlikely outcome. And if we look at some of the work that's been done on the generations we can test, because doing this sort of research on children is obviously frowned upon, but you look at Gen Z, I mean, there's something like 78% of them are comfortable with technology being used to make their food versus 57% at the other end for boomers. So if we project that trend, or if it stays the same, we've got a high probability that these Gen Alphas are going to accept technology in their food. And if we look at some of the technologies we just talked about, low arable land use, little or no fresh water use, highly sustainable, and those are the attributes that Gen Alpha are looking for. So that speaks to these new technologies. They're influencing a huge amount of purchasing already, even though the oldest of them is only 14 years old. So waiting for 2030 or 2040 to worry about them, going to be too late.
It's impossible today to talk about technology and innovation without a discussion about generative AI.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you envision the role of AI evolving in food technology? And what should companies be doing to prioritize in order to stay ahead?
Let's just be clear. Traditional AI we've been using for a long time, but the AI's outputs are determined by explicit human programming. With generative AI, what we're doing is the AI's output is determined by the patterns it finds in the data it's trained upon, and it produces novel output. And all companies across all industries are going to benefit from supply chain optimization, customer experience, et cetera, But in the food industry, it's that NPD, that new product development R&D side that's really going to benefit, primarily because an AI can conceive of and handle something that the human mind even can't comprehend. You can't give a food technologist 20,000 ingredients and say, give me the best combination of 5 that optimizes for sustainability, price, taste, et cetera. They'll either go mad trying to do it, or they'll come back in 100 years and give you the answer. But generative AI goes, a couple of 100,000 ingredients, 20,000, 2,000, I don't really care. It's another fraction of a second for me to work these out for you. Now, you still need humans to come along and make sure that what the AI's come up with is reasonable and actually works, but its ability to generate novel formulations and novel ways of looking at things to optimize formulations for new products is enormous. And it's going to shorten the time from an idea to on the market, on the shelf, is going to be dramatically reduced.
What are some of the practical implications of that?
Companies have got to look at where the power is in their supply chain relationship, because we've always said data's the new oil, right? It goes back for a long time, but it's even more important today because these AIs need data to be trained on. If you're a large CPG company, supply manufacturer, you've got all this in-house data, you could use that to train an AI. Now, you're going to use that to train your suppliers' AI? Even with a contract, et cetera, you really want all your IP with your supplier? Or do you want to say, no, we now will look at our own generative AI and we'll have that in-house and we will take back some control of our products? And I think that's the question for the companies, because the power of generative AI is so great that the power balance could really shift throughout the supply chain depending upon who's got control of the data and who decides to actually implement generative AI.
Tony Hunter is a global food futurist and strategic consultant based in Brisbane, Australia. You can read more about Tony's visionary perspectives in the July issue of Food Technology.
Thank you to this episode's sponsor, Almond Board of California. Get inspired and learn more by visiting almonds.com/trends.
And that wraps up this episode of Omnivore. Thanks again to all our guests and my colleagues at Food Technology. Omnivore is produced and distributed by the Institute of Food Technologists. If you enjoyed today's show and want to learn more about Food Technology Magazine or how to join the conversation by becoming an IFT member, visit ift.org/membership. For more in-depth discussion about innovation in the science of food, check out IFT's other podcast, Side Dish, on the News and Publications page of ift.org. If you have comments or suggestions for future shows, just send us an email. The address is editors@ift.org. For the entire team at Food Technology and IFT, I'm Bill McDowell. Thanks for listening, and join us again for our next episode. This is Omnivore.